Welcome back, sleepy soul. Tonight, I am your storyteller, ready to drift you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more scary stories. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there, so please let me know in the comments. Also, if there's a particular story you'd like to hear next, feel free to suggest it. I went to the Great Smoky Mountains to clear my head, not to learn that the forest could speak straight into a person's bones. Tessa and I reached Camp Falls near dusk, the water the color of pewter as it poured over the stone shelves. We pitched the little dome tent where the ground was level and soft, then made dinner from a packet and laughed at how the noodles always tasted better after a hike. The evening came on gentle and cool. The white noise of the falls folded around us in a way that felt like being tucked in. We stacked a food bag on a bare line. I gathered sticks, broke them over my knee, and built a small fire in the ring. Sparks drifted up and died. Tessa sat on the log and rubbed her hands together. "This is the part where you tell a scary story," she said, nudging me with her boot. I grinned, checked my watch, and said, "At exactly 10:05, the forest will begin the sound design." I wish I hadn't said that. When a second hand reached the little mark and clicked forward, the night answered me. It began as a distant moan, like wind in a culvert, then grew and grew until it felt like the sound had mass. It didn't echo. It didn't come from one direction. It came from the earth itself, from the trees and stones and water, from the space inside my chest. The howl swelled and flattened. A sheet of noise stretched across the valley until I could feel the pressure of it in my ribs. It was too loud, too large, too deliberate to be anything I knew. Coyotes laugh, this did not. Owls question, this proclaimed. Human voices crack and waver. This was steady and old, like a warning blown through copper. Tessa's mouth hung open. I could see her breath in the beam of the flashlight that lay on the log, pointed at nothing. She whispered, "Bear?" But I shook my head before I knew I was doing it. The sound didn't finish. It decayed slowly, like a train passing into a tunnel. When it was gone, it left the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own blood moving. Then we heard the footsteps. They weren't quick. They weren't clumsy. Each step was a negotiated thing, a heavy weight set down with intent, a pause, then wait again. Pine needles compressed with a slick little hiss, and the old leaves under them made a sound like damp paper being folded. The steps moved around us in a broad loop. The fire seemed to shrink. I stood without meaning to and swung the flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through brush and painted wet leaves. I wished for the word deer. I wished for anything I could name. A smell arrived as if delivered on its own feet. At first I thought our trash bag had melted on the coals. Then I realized the smell was urgent and personal. It was rot married to sulfur, a sweet sour slap with a sharp edge like a match struck too close to the nose. It clawed at the back of my throat. Tears sprang to my eyes without grief behind them. I coughed, swallowed, coughed again. Tessa covered her mouth and gagged, her eyes watering. "Get inside," she said. I should have listened to her right then. Instead, I lifted the light and swept it hard to my left where the footsteps grew louder. The beam landed on a dark pile at the base of a laurel clump. For a second, my mind made it a stump. Then it stood up. If it had just been tall, I might have kept the word man. But the proportions fought that word. The shoulders were wide as a door and sloped forward so the neck disappeared. The arms were long enough that the hands hung below the knees. The hair wasn't glossy. It lay in long, matted lengths that drank the light. When the face turned toward me, the brow caught the beam like a low, smooth shelf. The eyes were too deep to reflect. The nose looked broken a long time ago, thick and flat. The mouth was closed, and that somehow was worse than teeth. A sound rose in my throat that was not a word. I dove for the tent so fast I tore a guy line loose. Tessa yanked the zipper down, and I slid in after her, hands shaking, breath coming short. The nylon door rasped up, and the world reduced to the thin wall of our shelter and the sound of the falls. I held the bear spray, safety still on, like a devotional object. The footsteps slowed. Something large shifted its weight. The smell thickened until it was not just a scent, but a physical thing in the air, a hot cloth held over the face. I pressed the inside of my elbow to my nose and chewed on the fabric to stop reflex gagging. Tessa grabbed my wrist. I could feel her pulse counting fast. Minutes in the tent do not behave like minutes do anywhere else. We lived second to second. I listened to the heavy, pacing outside like a person listens to a storm, mapping the approach and retreat, the way gusts balloon and collapse. Sometimes the steps moved off toward the falls, then returned from the opposite side, as if a circle had been drawn around us. Now, and then a soft chuff came, a breath forced through a throat not made like ours. The nylon wall bowed once, just a little, as if a palm settled there. I pictured a hand the size of a skillet testing the texture of our world. The wall flexed back, slow as a held breath released. At one point a knock echoed across the trees. Wood on wood, single and deliberate. It carried the way a hammer strike does in a garage. Another knock answered from farther off, thinner, like a reply from a smaller room. Tessa squeezed my wrist so hard my fingers tingled. "Don't talk," she mouthed, as if I could. The falls went on, but the sound of water felt far away, as if we were under glass. Mist built on the tent and ran in tiny streams down the wall. Every drip sounded like a footfall until it didn't. A wind rose and fell. With the wind came breaks in the smell, wet rock, fern, ash from our dead fire, then the rot again, then sulfur like a struck match and something like wet dog, only stronger and older. I breathed through the crook of my arm and waited for my body to learn the stink so it would stop being shock and become background. Time collected itself at last. The steps grew farther apart, not because the thing was running, but because the circle widened. The pressure went out of the air like a room after a heavy guest leaves. I kept the spray in my fist anyway. Tessa shifted her weight, and the sleeping pad rasped as loud as a zipper in a library. We waited longer than made sense. We waited until the waiting itself felt like an act of safety. Finally, I unzipped the door. Cold air slid in, and I wanted to drink it. The smell was still out there, but thinner, as if it had been wrung through gauze. I swept the flashlight low across the ground. There were no neat prints, only deep, broad depressions where needles had been mashed into the dirt. At our cooking area, I found a smear of something gray-green on a stone, and the stink leaped at me again. I backed away gagging. Near the laurel, the brush looked bent and then carefully laid back, as if something large had pushed through and then set the branches down instead of letting them spring. A few long hairs clung to a twig, not fur like a bear's, but hair, dark, coarse, and almost oily. I didn't take them. I don't know why. It felt like pocketing a piece of a warning. We returned to the tent because we had nowhere else to go. Sleep came in pieces like a broadcast from a station at the edge of range. Around 3, I woke to a short burst of that same mournful sound, farther away this time, and then to the answer of another voice even farther. In the space behind those sounds, the forest breathed like a living chest. Sunlight did not so much arrive as prove it could still find us. The trees shifted from black to green. The falls remembered they were water and not static. Birds took inventory and spoke up. We stepped out and stood very still. The world looked ordinary, the way a house looks ordinary in the morning after a night when someone knocked at the back door and never said why. Morning returned. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. I remember the sound of my skis more than the cold. February on Lake Michigan is a long breath held under ice, but the sound, the hiss over packed powder, the scratch when crust buckled, the tap of poles, kept me honest about where I was. I followed the pale seam where sand and snow became one color. The sky felt close and empty. I was 23 and stubborn, hungry for that clean feeling you get when each breath turns to steam and vanishes behind you. The lake was a puzzle of frozen plates shoved up like fallen shingles. I kept to the flat, where snow had drifted smooth. A gull lifted and scolded. I laughed into my scarf. My right boot rubbed my heel, so I stopped to circle my ankle and stamped twice to settle the ache. Then I pushed off again toward the line of reeds that drew a horizon on the ice. Why tell you now? I know from others, snowmobilers, deputies, photographs under hard fluorescent light. Two skis lay flat on the ice, parallel as closed eyes. My backpack sat between them like a period at the end of a sentence. My footprints, neat and then more spaced as my stride lengthened, ran 200 yards toward open water and ended where the ice changed color. After that, nothing. I do not remember falling. I do not remember a crack, a plunge, that bite of water that makes the lungs forget their job. I do not remember thrashing or the black lid of a lake closing over me. By any rule that makes sense, I should be dead. I remember sunlight through grass. I woke in a field that smelled like July. Heat pressed the back of my neck. When I sat up, the world tipped and then steadied. A two-lane road ran along one side. The air was soft, not the sharp air of a Michigan spring. The clothes on my body weren't mine. The jeans fit wrong. The cuffs were frayed in someone else's way. The t-shirt was pale yellow with a cracked red logo I didn't know. My feet wore new sneakers bright enough to look like a dare. Beside me lay sunglasses with a tiny UV sticker still clinging to one lens. A canvas shoulder bag rested in the grass like a dog that had trotted beside me and finally sat down. Inside the bag, I found a map with the corner missing, Utah, Zion circled in blue pen. A visitor pass to the Art Institute of Chicago, stamped in a month my head refused to place. A transit card for San Francisco with "Remember the Stairs" written in marker. A crumpled receipt from a diner in Madison, Wisconsin, with a crooked smiley face next to the tip. A paperback with a cracked spine and lines underlined in a hand that looked like mine when I was tired. A pocket notebook with 2 words on the first page: call home. The sign at the curve down the road gave me a town name I knew only from maps. Massachusetts. My mouth made a dry sound that wanted to be a laugh. I walked to the shoulder and stuck out my thumb. A truck stopped. The driver was the quiet kind. He offered water and asked if I needed a hospital. I said maybe not yet. He drove me into town, let me out by a pay phone, and slid 2 quarters into my hand like a tip he hoped I wouldn't refuse. I dialed my parents' number. My father said my name in a voice that had been practicing. "Where are you?" he asked, like maybe I was only late. I read the town name off the sign above the phone. He told me the date, May 5th, 1979. I repeated it. It was a number that didn't fit behind my eyes. Police at the small station were kind and careful. An officer asked what I remembered. I told him about waking in heat, about the bag, about the sticker on the sunglasses. He asked about February. I told him about the noise of my skis, the gull, my right heel, the reeds across the ice. He asked if I used drugs. I told him no. He wrote anyway. Doctors checked my eyes, tapped my knees, drew blood. They said dehydration, shock, possible dissociative episode. A resident asked again about narcotics. I said no. He nodded like a man at a stop sign on an empty road. My parents arrived fast enough that the hours between the call and their arms felt like a trick. My mother held my face and cried like someone who had already buried me. My father hugged me as if to scold the distance itself. They had stood on the shore and said goodbye to a body the lake would not return. We emptied the canvas bag on their kitchen table. The Utah map had a coffee ring like a small crescent moon. The museum pass was creased. The transit card smelled faintly of sea and bread. The diner receipt had a name at the top, L. None of us recognized. The notebook with "Call Home" sat there like a dare fulfilled. I tried to picture writing it, but memory stayed out of reach. At night, my dreams were postcards. A hill of red rock stepped like a staircase. A street where fog lifted and settled. Stairs, so many stairs, my hand on a rail that hummed. I woke once to the sound of gulls and the smell of dough. We lived far from the ocean. We followed what we could. The diner in Madison remembered a quiet guy who ordered coffee and pie and left behind a paperback. The transit office in San Francisco said a card with that number had been issued last summer. The museum mailed a ledger copy with a smudge where a name should be. Utah sent a brochure with a ranger's date stamp. Each answer solved nothing and sharpened the question. Sometimes memory felt like a shimmer. Holding the sunglasses, I saw for a blink the white of desert light narrowing the world. Turning a page in the paperback to a sentence someone had underlined, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." I tasted cold and felt the push of my legs driving skis over clean snow. Then it was gone. People needed theories. They offered abduction, cults, a year-long blackout. A cashier said she believed in lines on maps connecting vanishings. I nodded to be polite. Truth felt less like a pattern and more like a blank space shaped like me. My body kept secrets my mind couldn't read. I had a farmer's tan I didn't earn at home, a new nick on a knuckle, a haircut not my barber's. My legs were stronger. "You look like you've been walking," my mother said. "You look like you've been somewhere," my father said. I tried to return to classes. Libraries felt safe until they were too quiet. Then the quiet had weight. Crowds made me dizzy. Empty rooms made me feel watched. I avoided frozen water. On a bright day, I bought another pair of sunglasses and left the UV sticker on without thinking. Sometimes before sunrise, I stand on the porch and listen. Not for voice or proof, just for the sound of skis on snow, that rhythm of push and glide and the pause between. I tell myself a person can be missing while he sits at his own table. I tell myself being returned is not the same as coming home. Once, a letter without a return address arrived. Inside was a postcard of a bridge beneath thunderheads. On the back, in a hand like mine written with my left, were the words, "Remember the stairs." I put the card in the canvas bag and slid the bag into the closet's dark. If you want a last page revelation, a key turning, a door opening onto a room where the missing months wait, I can't give it. My story is a house with a locked basement and a yard full of footprints that stop at a fence. The wind shifts, the air smells like thawed earth and old leaves, and inside my chest something moves the way a ski first moves after a push. Smooth, undeniable, direction without destination. I'm a man who stepped off the edge of winter and woke in summer with a bag of souvenirs from a life I don't recall living. I have proof I was loved enough to be mourned and proof I was stubborn enough to keep walking. The space between those proofs is my mystery and my burden. Some mornings I tie my laces and feel, for one clean second, the old certainty that each breath will steam and vanish behind me. On those mornings I think, keep moving. On those mornings I think, call home. I used to think a forest couldn't lie. Trees don't scheme, rocks don't tell stories they can't back up, and a lake doesn't put on a voice it doesn't have. That was before the night in Wasatch when sounds came from nowhere and ash fell from a clear sky, and a friend of mine knelt by the water with his mouth open like he was screaming, but no sound came out. We went up there because we were young and thought we understood our own edges. It was late summer, 1992. 4 of us packed into my old car. Me, a shy kid named Simon who had never camped without his family, my girlfriend at the time, and a guy we bought mushrooms from who insisted on coming along. He said he had special stock and wanted us to do it right. I didn't want him there, but he had the supply and a way of talking that made a no feel like you were being rude to a guest. He slid into my back seat like he owned it and patted my shoulder as if I were the one tagging along. We reached the campground as the sun lowered behind the ridge and threw gold into every crack. The air smelled like dust and pine sap. We set up 2 tents near a lake that sat still and black in a bowl of furs. Fish rose in small circles and left rings that spread and faded like someone practicing a quiet magic. The dealer, I'll call him Nash because that's what he called himself that week, kept swinging between friendly and sharp. He teased Simon for the way he stacked kindling, laughed too hard when my girlfriend told a small joke, and went quiet if anyone asked him a question back. He wore a denim jacket even though it was warm and kept rubbing a coin in his pocket. When he pulled out the mushrooms, he did it with a little performance, lifting the bag like a priest lifting a cup. We ate after dark. I took a small amount. I liked the soft edge and the way colors glow, not the feeling of dropping through a trapdoor. Simon asked how much he should take, and Nash told him to be bold. I told him to start slow. He looked between us and chose the wrong voice to trust. He took more than he should have. He chewed like it was an obligation. At first, everything was fine, even sweet. The fire was a friend. Shadows danced in a way that looked like music. The lake made a sound I had not noticed before, like breath in a deep chest. We sat in a circle close enough to feel one another's movements, and for a little while the world felt generous. The needles overhead made a soft roof. The stars did that thing where they seemed lower than usual, as if the sky had taken a step toward us. Then Nash started picking at Simon. It was small at first, questions with barbs in them. You ever do anything without asking? You always let someone else tell you how much. He laughed, but there was no smile in it. Simon tried to laugh along, then try to go quiet, then try to change the subject. Nash pressed like a thumb on a bruise. He had that look some people get when they find someone gentler than they are, a kind of hunger. Ease up, I told him. He spread his hands and said he was just keeping the vibe honest, which is the kind of thing you say when you want to be mean and not be called mean. My girlfriend scooted closer to me and squeezed my knee. Simon stood. His mouth made a shape like he wanted to say he was fine, and then he shook his head and walked toward the lake. He moved like a person trying to carry a full glass without spilling. I got on my feet, but Nash touched my sleeve. Let him figure himself out, he said. You coddle him, he'll never learn. He said it as if he'd been put in charge of us by a power we'd all agreed to. I watched Simon until the dark swallowed him. We waited a few minutes. The fire clicked. A fish rose and fell. Finally, I said I was going to check on him. Nash said he'd come too, as if it were his idea. We walked the shore with one flashlight. Our breath was loud. The drug had turned the trees into a little theater of moving lines. I felt good in my body, but alert in a way that did not feel like joy. Something had gone off. The night was the same temperature, and the stars were still where they belonged, but something had stepped into the scene that didn't know the script. We heard it first, before we saw him or anything else. It started low, like a generator trying to turn over far away, and then it rose until it became a siren without a source. It was not a police siren or an ambulance. It was more like an industrial alarm, the kind that says a plant is venting or a valve has blown. It moved through the trees without echo. It had no direction. It vibrated in my jaw and pressed in my ears. It was so loud I expected to see it. Then it cut off like a switch had been thrown. The quiet fell hard and absolute. My head rang in the silence. Nash grabbed my arm. "They're here," he said. "They stick you and weigh you and measure how much you can take. You should not have taken that much. They'll think he wants it." "Shut up," I said, too sharp. My own voice sounded wrong to me. We moved again. The beam found the lake and ran a white finger across the skin of it. That's when we saw him. Simon was kneeling at the edge, his jeans dark where water had soaked them. His arms hung at his sides like he'd forgotten what arms were for. His head was tipped back, so far I thought it would drop off. His mouth was open so wide the angle looked painful. But no sound came. His eyes were up, locked on the sky, as if he were watching something cross it that only he could see. I went to him and put a hand on his shoulder. His shirt was dusted with white. My fingers came away covered in a fine powder, the lightest stuff I've ever felt, like the ash you get when paper burns and then just stops being. It was on his face too, and in his eyelashes, and it lay on his hair like frost. It didn't smell like a campfire, not exactly. It had a sterile smell, a clean room smell, but wrong. I touched his jaw, tried to lower his face. His jaw did not move. It was locked open on a scream his throat had decided not to bother with. "Simon," I said, and the name felt small. Hey man." His eyelids didn't even twitch. The ash lifted in a little ghost when I breathed on it. Behind me, Nash talked and talked. See? They stuck him, and now he's out of his body. You don't listen to me. You get stuck like a moth in a jar, and you learn things you don't come back from." He pointed at the trees, as if he could see hands behind them. "They're in the bark. They're in the wires." "You can't hear the wires?" "I can hear the wires." "Help me," I said. "Get on his other side." We reached for Simon together. He was stiff at first, like something had set inside him. Then, too fast, he went loose, his head lolling, his arms heavy. The shift was so sudden it felt like we had broken him. We laid him gently on the ground. His chest moved shallow and fast. His lips were white with the powder. I tried to brush it away, but it just smeared lighter, and then it wasn't there at all, as if it had decided it would not be touched. The flashlight beam hummed in my hand. The siren came again. Closer. It swelled until I thought my teeth would crack, then stopped on a clean line. Between the end of the sound and the return of normal night noise, there was a little slot of time that felt empty of everything. I have never heard a silence that big. It was like being inside a power failure. "Back to camp," I said. "We need help." Nash stared at the trees. His pupils were huge. "They'll follow," he said. "They don't walk. They just arrive." He said it like a confession. I put my hands under Simon's armpits and lifted. He was not heavy, but he was not helping. We got him to his feet and dragged him a step at a time. Halfway to camp, lightning jumped over the ridge. There was no thunder right away. Wind came like a breath that forgot to end. The first raindrops were fat and far apart. Then the air tore open and rain fell so hard I couldn't see the beam of the light unless it hit something. In that wash, the white powder vanished. I would look down and it would be gone from his shirt and gone from my hands, as if it had never been there, as if the rain had not washed it off but had washed away the idea that it ever existed. My girlfriend heard us and ran out. She had the good sense to be frightened and practical at the same time. We put Simon in the tent on top of our sleeping bags while she called for a ranger on the pay phone by the camp office. The storm snapped a tree somewhere close. Wind took the rain sideways and pressed the tent wall onto our backs. Simon's breath hitched and paused and started again. We said his name over and over like a rope we were throwing to him. A ranger and an EMT came in a truck with lights off because of the lightning. They moved like people who have walked into bad tents before. The EMT felt for a pulse, put a hand on Simon's chest, and met my eyes with a look I have seen only a few times in my life. The look that says, "I need you to stand back now." They worked by flashlight and headlamp. They said words that have meanings but no comfort. They called the hospital on a radio that made everything into pieces of speech. They did what people do when the body in front of them is not a story. He died there, in our tent, while the storm beat down and the ranger stood with his back to the door like a guard against the weather. The EMT wrote the time in a wet notebook. The white powder was nowhere. When I asked about it, my throat closed around the description. I said it anyway. The ranger nodded, once like he had heard something like it before, which made me want to be sick. Nash was gone by morning. His jacket lay by the fire, heavy with rain. The coin was on a rock, as if he had put it down to mark a thought and then forgotten to pick it up again. We did not see him drive away. We asked at the gate and at the store, and no one had seen him. Later, when the police tried to find him, the name he'd given us dissolved when anyone leaned on it. After that, the story never lined up the same way twice. My girlfriend remembered hearing the siren before we ate. I remembered it after. The ranger said he'd heard something from the dam that sometimes went off in storms. Only he could not say he had ever heard it at night before. Another camper swore he saw a glow on the trees like light from welding, but the rain had taken any trace and left only the fact that you can't hold rain. When I tried to describe the ash, people nodded the way you nod at a man telling you about a dream. The EMT wrote, "Cause undetermined," and then left the line blank. We told ourselves careful versions. Maybe the dosage had been wrong. Maybe the storm was more than a storm and pressure changed too fast. Maybe something in the dust on the trail wasn't dust. Maybe the siren wasn't a siren, but the sound the earth makes when it moves, and people who live here know it and don't talk about it. Because why would you? Each, maybe, helped for a minute and then failed. Years later, when I stand in a hardware store and a forklift backs up with that long, flat alarm, my body remembers the night in a way my brain does not. The hair on my arms rises. I taste metal. In certain light, I will see white on a shirt and want to brush it off, and my hand will pause because I expect it to lift and float and refuse my touch. I do not eat mushrooms anymore. I do not camp by lakes. I do not go looking for sirens. I think about Simon's face lifted to the sky, his mouth open as if the world were pouring through him. I think about how he was both trapped and unreachable. I think about how a forest, which I used to believe could not lie, can still hold truths in ways that people like me are not good at hearing. Maybe we did not listen to the place. Maybe it told us no in a language we had laughed at. Or maybe we did everything right and something wrong still found us. A person can live with that thought. A person can also wake up at 3 in the morning and stare at the ceiling and decide he cannot. People ask what happened that night. I say we went to the mountains to feel big and small in the right ways, and we met a version of big and small we didn't ask for. I say a sound came with no mouth, and ash fell with no fire, and a boy I liked knelt by a lake and left before the rain could decide what to do with us. I say the truth is simple. He died. The rest is the part that follows me. If I had a neat lesson to offer, I would not trust it. What I have is a memory of trying to lift someone whose body had turned to a strange weight, a sound without a source, and a powder that refused to be caught. What I have is this. Sometimes a place can take your measure without your consent. Sometimes it will give you a warning that you will only recognize later, when you're standing in a store and a forklift beeps and you feel the lake in your bones again. Sometimes you come home with a story that won't fit in your mouth without turning the edges of it down to make it smaller. I'm tired of making it smaller. This is what happened. This is what I carry. I learned to trust Tuolumne Meadows by listening to the river. Even in July, it speaks in low sentences. Riffle, pause, riffle. In 2015, I wore the light volunteer badge that says you're not quite a ranger, but the night still counts you. My partner that evening, a seasonal named Tom, kept the radio on his knee while we rolled the loop roads, reminding the last hikers to turn back before granite and sky agreed on black. The meadows turned the color of deep water, and the first stars punched through like pins in felt. I thought of my grandmother's rule. Keep your eyes slow when the woods look back. The road narrowed where lodge poles lean in and the shoulders drop to black ditches. Tom dimmed the beams. Dear love stepping out just as your heart settles. The engine murmured, tires hissed, and then a shape shouldered from the right-hand trees, and the world forgot how to be ordinary. Training said bear. The size allowed it. The gait, heavy and deliberate, allowed it too. Long brown hair hung in wet-looking ropes as if the day's heat had pooled in it. It paused with one forelimb on the yellow line, like it was feeling for warmth. Tom braked until the truck rocked. The shape turned and met the beams. The eyes didn't flash and vanish the way Ursine eyes do. They held the light the way coins hold sun. Amber, not green. The muzzle was too long for a bear. Lips edged back just enough to show long teeth I'd never cataloged. The skull was canine, but wrong by a few merciless degrees. The ears lay back, widening the head, and when it exhaled, I tasted hot pennies and wild garlic. Its forelimbs ended in hands, pads glossy, nails curved like black chisels. They belonged to something that could climb and hold and take. "Do not get out," I said, though Tom hadn't moved. The creature squared to the truck and peered into the cab like a tenant deciding whether to answer a knock. It made a noise I fell to my ribs before my ears caught it, a rising howl that wasn't loud, so much as complete. The glass hummed. The night tightened. It dropped the sound and formed a human kind of scowl, an expression with opinions about us. I remember my grandmother and let my eyelids stay lazy. Blink too fast, and the woods decide you've lost your nerve. What happened next began with a wet, decisive pop, like a shoulder sliding back into place. The spine lifted under the hair in a ripple. The pelvis rolled. Rear legs found new angles. It rose. On all fours it had been animal. Upright. It became a person shaped in tension, wearing an animal the way a man might wear a coat. 8 feet, maybe more. The hands hung lower now, nails catching the headlights hard silver. It tilted its head and looked down the beam with the patient dislike of a landlord inspecting damage. Tom whispered a prayer in his own language. I lowered my window 2 inches. Cold and sap slipped in, and beneath them a thread of rot that didn't belong to summer. "We see you," I said. I hadn't planned to speak. The words came from a pocket I thought was empty. The creature leaned forward, tasted our scent, and answered with a shorter howl, as if calling a witness who already knew the testimony. No echo returned. Only our hearts and the truck's soft idle filled the space. "Back up," Tom breathed. "No," I said, surprised by the certainty. "It'll chase the motion." I didn't know how I knew. I simply knew. Keeping its eyes on us, it stepped backward, not turning, backing away as a man does when he refuses to give you his back but is finished with the conversation. Hair drank the light. The trees accepted it without surprise. It merged into the dark, and the dark closed as neatly as water after a stone. We waited like people at a dead intersection, pretending there is a rule to follow. When my hands remembered they were hands, I wrote the time. 8:47 on all fours. 8:49 upright. 8:50 gone. I added a line only I would read. Eyes like coins. Duty kept us rolling, speaking to a late pair at the trailhead with voices that didn't betray what our bones knew. When we finally killed the engine behind the station, our breaths sounded too large in the small room. I lay awake and felt an ache in my ankles, as if my body had briefly borrowed another way of standing and wanted it back. Morning remade the meadow into a calendar. We walked the shoulder anyway. No prints, only heavy scuffs where needles have been pressed into damp dust and released. On a twig, one coarse brown hair. I left it. You don't pocket a warning. At the desk, I filed the bland version. Large animal crossed, vehicle stopped, animal departed, and kept the true version in my throat like a warm pebble. When I called my grandmother, she listened and said, "Some things go on two paths. Show them which one you'll keep." I asked how. "Keep your eyes," she said, "and let the silence teach the rest." Stories gathered as summer thinned. Hikers reported a shape pacing them just inside the trees. A child told me, solemn as a bailiff, that a tall dogman watched from the bridge and set thumbs on the rail. A backpacker swore he heard a howl that pressed his tongue to his teeth. I gave the bear talk, the whistle and buddy talk, the keep your distance talk. I didn't lie. I told the portion of truth a person can use without breaking their trip in half. At night, I dreamed in tall silhouettes. Sometimes it stood at the foot of my bunk like a supervisor deciding whether I deserved to be woken. Sometimes it waded upright into the river, and the water received it like a stone returning to a pocket. I woke with half moons in my palms and my jaw sore from clenching. People asked if it was a man in a suit. They wanted the world tidy enough for a zipper. Prank, movie set, bear with mange. I have handled injured bears and watched dignity fail. This was not that. I have seen wolves write neat lines in snow and understood how their feet place. This was not that either. It was its own problem, old as a path between seasons and careful enough to choose when to be witnessed. I carried both truths, the report on paper and the other report, the one my bones filed and refused to misplace. 2 weeks later, near the same lodge poles, I rolled the window down the same 2 inches and let the mountain in. Sap, granite dust, and the faint wrongness again, as if something had passed by recently that wasn't in the catalog. I whispered the thanks I hadn't managed the first time. Not for the fear, which I keep like a tool in a clean drawer, but for the mercy. It could have come forward. It did not. It left me work instead, decide what I would see, and how quietly I could keep seeing it without needing the comfort of a name. If you go there, you'll call it beautiful and be right. You'll take pictures of grass the color of old coins and water like traveling glass. You'll hear coyotes and call them brave for how close they sound. If by bad luck and good fortune, the road narrows and something steps from the trees and asks with its face whether you've learned to look, do what kept me alive. Keep your eyelids slow. Don't give your fear your mouth. Don't reverse unless you're ready to be chased. Let it back away scowling and accept the gift of distance it offers. I still patrol when I can. The badge is heavier now, but the river says the same sentences. Some nights I think I hear a joint reset in the timber, that wet, decisive pop of a body remembering an older shape. On those nights, I breathe cold sap air and hold my eyes steady, grateful that the dark, which can be cruel, also knows how to let a person pass without insisting on a name for what watched them go. Mountains at 3:30 a.m. have their own rules. Headlights carve tunnels out of the fog, and you drive through them like belief, trusting the next 10 feet to appear. I've been a ranger long enough to know the feel of the road under the tires on a cold night. The chipped washboard, the brief smoothness where the county dumped fresh gravel, the way the cliffs lean close enough that your radio static sounds like a whisper. That night in 2014, the engine hummed, the defroster fought the mist, and the world was the width of 2 beams. I'd finished a late check of a trailhead where a couple of climbers were bivvying against the rules. We'd reached an understanding. They'd pack and move down to the car lot, and I wouldn't write them up. Afterward, The mountain grew very still, the way it does when even the owls have clocked out. I took the long switchback route because rockfall had fenced off my usual road. Fog thickened in the dips, lifted on the ridges, then flooded back as if the forest were breathing. My high beams caught movement on the right shoulder. One of those half-seen shifts you learn to watch. Animal shapes at night resolve in steps. Shadow, color, details you wish you hadn't seen. I eased off the gas so the truck wouldn't fishtail on a loose stone. The figure waited at the edge of the trees like someone deciding whether to step into a conversation. Deer stand wrong when they think they're invisible. Bears move like shoulders with feet. This shape didn't fit either. It was roughly my height, 5'10", maybe a hair more, and it was upright. I told myself person because that's what your brain hands you when it runs out of labels that feel safe. The fog stroked the beams and brightened in clouds around it. I rolled to a stop. When it stepped forward, the wrongness showed its teeth. The head was all German Shepherd, only more deliberate, like someone had drawn a dog's head with a ruler and then breathed life into the angles. The ears tipped back tight, muzzle long, black nose wet but clean, not the slack dampness of a scavenger. The body behind it was human is the only word for the arrangement. The fur lay thin enough to show the anatomy beneath, deltoids, biceps, a chest that moved with breath. No tail. Hands, not paws. 5 digits or 4 and a thumb, with nails curving to 3 or 4-inch claws that looked like they'd choose their own targets. It settled one of those hands on my hood as lightly as you'd set a teacup on a saucer. The hood dipped the way metal does when it's been told a fact about the world. Heat climbed through the steel into its palm. I could see the tension ladder up the forearm, muscle strands shifting under the hair. The eyes found mine and held. Amber, not the flat glow you get from tapetum shine. This was a living color, something that made decisions. The face didn't snarl exactly. It set its lip to show that it could. Every animal I've dealt with has a moment when it chooses to become a problem or to remain a lesson. I didn't want to teach anything with my body. I kept both hands visible on the wheel and didn't move except to breathe. I eased the truck into reverse and let the brake out just enough to make the gravel whisper. The hand on the hood didn't press. It stayed there like a warning. The creature held my gaze the way a person does when they want you to understand there's nothing between you but intention. I tasted battery on my tongue, my heartbeat in my wrists. The radio hissed on my belt and then mercifully went quiet. I reversed 2 truck lengths. The hand lifted. The creature stepped into the open lane as if it owned the center line and didn't wish to share. The amber eyes never left the cab. I put the truck in drive. I didn't gun it. I rolled forward as if I were passing a stopped car, any Thursday morning problem. I could feel it weighing me, whether the motion meant retreat or disrespect. I gave it only the side of the truck and my profile. As the fender slid past where it stood, I realized it had set itself exactly where a person would stand to get a plate number. The fog closed behind it like a stage curtain. I didn't breathe until I'd put 20 yards between us. The mirrors were mostly white with mist. I adjusted one with 2 fingers and a prayer. In the rear view, the fog thickened, thinned, and then it was there, in the center of the road where my taillights threw dim red onto its chest. It dropped to all 4s without folding, like water choosing a steeper channel, and it ran. There's a speed at which a human running on all 4s would look ridiculous. This wasn't that. The stride ate distance practical as a train. The claws struck stone and found purchase I wouldn't have believed existed. The shoulders flowed. The head stayed level. It hit 40 feet behind me and then 30. The truck complained, engine pitching high as I asked for more without risking a skid. Fog gave me 10 feet of warning and I took all of it. The thing's reflection flashed in the bumper chrome twice, 3 times. I counted because counting is the one thing that makes fear mind you. At some point, I heard it pads Nail's breath. The breath was steady, not panicked. Intelligent. The pursuit wasn't a frenzy. It was a decision being enforced. The road curved. I held the line. If I fishtailed, I'd give it a flank and an excuse. The truck bumped, loped, surged. I spoke in a voice I barely recognized. Stay behind me. Stay behind me. Keep your lane. It wasn't a prayer exactly. It was a rule I was trying to write out loud. 45 seconds is not long unless each second arrives with claws. By the fourth curve, the sound fell behind, as if something had signaled a stop I couldn't hear. I spared a look in the mirror and saw only fog and my own taillights smearing themselves into pink ghosts. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I drove until the forest thinned and the fog opened enough that I could see the dark ribbon of the river below and the hint of morning blankness far to the east. I pulled off at a turnout and let my hand shake where it wouldn't matter. On the hood, between the faint dust of road and a film of wet, were 5 prints where the hand had rested. Not paw marks, no pads, no web, no heel. Smooth pressure with tiny ridges of dirt pushed up at the tips where the claws had hovered close enough to corrugate the grime. I touched one with the back of my finger and felt nothing but damp metal. I wished for a cast kit and also never to have to explain why I'd wanted one. Back at the station, a coffee in my hand did the job of a witness, kept me upright and talking. I filed the safest version of the report. Unidentified animal encountered. Bipedal posture observed. No aggression beyond proximity. Vehicle undamaged. Time, approximately 0330. I deleted the hand on the hood twice and put it back in the third draft as contact. I left the chase out entirely. I could already hear the jokes, the slow eyebrows, the offers to swap shifts so I could get more sleep. I didn't go home. I drove the loop in daylight with 2 other rangers, and we found nothing obvious. A few scuffs in the gravel we could attribute to anything. One streak in the dust that might have been a wet paw, but was in the wrong shape and angle for any paw I've ever measured. No tufts of fur on brush. No scat. The fog had licked the road clean when it lifted. The mountain kept its record the way it keeps most of them, in muscle and rumor. People tell me what they think I saw. A bear with a face full of porcupine quills. A man in a costume. A trick of the fog and the hour. They are not stupid explanations. I've used them myself in other stories, so I could sleep. But I know the weight of a hand on a hood. I know how eyes look when something is thinking, not reacting. I know the respectful threat of a predator that won't waste energy, but will spend it if you give a reason. The truth is boring and terrible. Something that wore a dog's head and a body like mine wanted me to know I was on its road. For months after, I changed small habits. I never parked nose in on fog nights. Always nose out, so forward was the easiest way. I kept a calm voice ready because panic is a language animals respect only if you're smaller. In the rear view, I watched the road with a new kind of attention, not for what was ahead, but for what decided to come after. I still work nights when the schedule needs a body. Fog still climbs out of the gullies and makes the world small. Sometimes I pull onto that same stretch and stop, engine idling, and roll the window down just enough to let in pine and wet stone. I picture that hand on the hood and let the memory sit with me. I don't call it a monster. I don't call it anything. Names are a way of pretending we own what we survived. I prefer the honest arrangement we had that night. I would go forward. It would let me go on the condition that I remembered whose road it really was. Night patrols have their rhythm. You circle the same roads, check the pullouts, glance at the trailheads, and tell yourself you're watching for campers or fires. In truth, half the job is keeping yourself awake. That night in 2011, I was coasting along North Side Drive just past 11, headlights sweeping across the black river of pines. The sky was starless, clouds so thick they pressed the light back down. The figure appeared in a meadow. At first it looked like a hiker sitting alone in the grass, maybe lost or cooling down from a trail run. I slowed, angled my spotlight, and pulled onto the shoulder. The beam should have caught clothes, a face, any kind of detail. Instead, it showed nothing but a human outline cut out of darker black. No jacket, no hat, no reflective gear. Just a silhouette that refused to give up texture. I stepped out of the truck. My boots crunched in the gravel. The figure stood. That's when my stomach turned over. It didn't rise like a man brushing grass from his knees. It seemed to extend upward, as if gravity had been mistaken about it. The shape didn't wobble or adjust. It simply was upright 1 second after it wasn't. I opened my mouth to call out, but the air seemed to thicken. The shape leaned forward, then lifted clear off the ground. No arms swinging, no effort, just a glide, smooth as fog across ice. It came 20, maybe 25 feet closer, not fast, not slow, and then nothing. It melted out of the beam like a shadow being erased. The meadow was empty again. I sat back in the cab, trying to write it off. Trick of the lights. Exhaustion. But my hands were shaking too badly to hold the notebook. I didn't move the truck for a long time. The meadow stayed empty. The next morning, I spoke with campers from the North Pines Loop. A man with 2 kids said something had rattled their RV door handle again and again around midnight. His wife described a dark man standing just outside their window. She said his eyes glowed red like taillights through smoke. Her youngest cried when she said it. He'd seen it too. Another family told me of a figure by the trees, watching them until they shouted. Everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever it was, it didn't feel curious. It felt cruel. I never wrote it in an official log. Try telling a supervisor you saw a shadow glide toward you and then dissolve. Try explaining red eyes and a feeling of evil that clung to your clothes like smoke. You'd get laughter, or worse, a note in your file that follows you forever. But even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see that shape unfolding upward, blacker than black, moving in a way that didn't belong to this place. And when I pass that stretch of meadow, I keep the windows rolled tight. Because some things in Yosemite aren't lost hikers or black bears. They're shadows that know you're watching, and they want you to know it too. I've hiked most of my life. The Appalachian Ridges are where I go to untangle myself, where silence is meant to feel like a kindness. But silence can change. In 2015, I learned it can turn into a warning. That September afternoon, I was alone, a day pack on my shoulders, and a cheap thermos swinging from my hand. The trail wound high above a ravine, oak and pine rising on either side. Then, without ceremony, the forest went quiet. No squirrels scratching bark, no wrens trading songs, not even the hum of insects. It was as if the woods had pulled a blanket over their mouth. I slowed. Silence like that doesn't just happen. It arrives. My boots scuffed rock louder than I wanted. Ahead, just beyond a spill of boulders, something shifted. At first it looked like a big black dog nosing between the rocks. But then it stepped clear, and my body knew before my mind caught up that I was not looking at any dog. The thing was massive, heavier than a timber wolf, taller at the shoulder than my waist. Its coat was coal black, patchy in places, its muzzle wet with something darker that dripped in threads. The eyes, God, the eyes, were yellow, glowing not with reflection but with a steady inner burn. It lowered its head, and that's when I saw it. Blood smeared across the muzzle, glistening on the fur of its throat. Whatever it had been feeding on wasn't far. My stomach turned, but fear overrode it, because in the next breath the creature lifted higher, Not just standing straighter, but rising onto two legs like that was its truest shape. The transformation wasn't clumsy. It was practiced. A body that shouldn't have been able to balance upright carried itself like a man. Broad shoulders, chest like a bodybuilder's, muscles rolling beneath the thin fur. The waist narrowed, but the arms stayed long and ended in clawed hands that flexed as though testing the air. I don't remember deciding to run. I only remember the way the trail blurred, the pounding of my boots, and the certainty that the silence behind me was moving. I didn't look back, not once. When I reached the road where my car sat alone, I slammed the door, started the engine with hands that fumbled the keys, and drove until trees thinned and houses rose from the valley floor. I didn't talk about it. Not for years. What words could make that sound real? People laugh at Bigfoot stories. They'd laugh harder at a wolf man with muscles like a prize fighter. So I carried it myself. I dreamed of yellow eyes. Then in 2018, it came again. Not on the trail this time, but at a friend's property in rural Pennsylvania. He kept horses, 3 of them in a stable out back. I stayed the night in his farmhouse, the kind with wood floors that groan and walls that keep secrets. After dinner, we heard the horses scream, a noise so high and panicked it didn't sound like any animal I knew. We ran out with flashlights, beams cutting across the field. The stable door had been torn clean off its hinges, splintered wood thrown 10 feet away. One of the horses lay crumpled inside, neck twisted wrong, the smell of blood sharp and hot in the cold air. My friend shouted, but his voice was swallowed by something else. Movement, heavy and deliberate. I swung my beam toward the tree line. There it was, taller than the stable roof. 8 feet at least. Eyes like lanterns in the dark, burning yellow. It held a tree branch in one hand. Not snapped twigs, but a limb thick as my wrist. It gripped it like a club. It didn't charge. It didn't need to. It began circling, slow and sure, always just at the edge of our light. We tracked it with our beams, but it never crossed fully into view. Instead, it tested us. It rattled the doorknobs of the farmhouse when we fled inside. It scraped claws down the siding, long, deliberate pulls. We heard heavy weight shifting on the porch roof. Then a face at the window, those same eyes, burning, watching. It could have broken in if it wanted. The way it tore that stable door off, it could have shredded our locks like paper. But it didn't. It didn't want in. It wanted us afraid, and it wanted us to know it was choosing not to finish what it started. Intelligent fear tactics, not hunger. The night stretched long. We sat in the dark kitchen with a shotgun on the table, though I had no faith a shell would matter. The sound circled. Sometimes it was at the back door, sometimes the front, sometimes upstairs, a weight shifting across the boards. None of us slept. When dawn finally seeped gray across the valley, the noises stopped. The porch was empty. The stable was silent, save for the buzzing of flies. We stepped outside to find claw marks on the siding, deep grooves that no man with a tool could fake. My friend moved 2 months later. He sold the place cheap and never looked back. He won't talk about that night. And when pressed, he shrugs and says coyotes. But I know what I saw. Twice now. The Appalachians carry stories. Dogmen, werewolves, things that slip between man and beast. I used to laugh at them. Now I keep my hikes shorter, closer roads. At night, I shut my curtains tight. And when silence falls too thick in the forest, I turn back. Because I've learned that some predators don't hunt to eat. Some hunt to remind you who belongs to the dark. I've hiked the Smokies for years, but nothing prepared me for what I saw at Spruce Flats Falls in 2019. My buddy Mike and I had brought my dog, Jasper, a 70-pound shepherd mix who was usually fearless on trails. That day, even before the real strangeness began, Jasper acted wrong. He whined at the trailhead, tail tucked, hackles stiff. I brushed it off as heat or fatigue. If I'd listened harder, maybe I wouldn't still wake up sweating over what came next. The falls trail was quiet, too quiet. Normally you'd hear birds stitching their songs through the canopy, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing like a backdrop. Instead, we walked into a vacuum. No sound, but our boots crunching and the water trickling somewhere ahead. The air changed too, it prickled. I've stood near substations before, felt that faint electrical charge in the skin, the hair on your arms lifting. That's how it felt. My chest hummed like I was inside a power line. Then the smell hit. Rotten eggs, sulfur, so sharp it made my throat burn. Jasper stopped outright, braced his paws, and whimpered deep in his chest. Mike shot me a look that said this isn't right. I nodded, though what could we do? Turn back? I wish we had. The trees shifted, not from wind. The air was still, but as if something large moved among them, bending branches and letting them sway back with strange rhythm. Our eyes caught motion, but it slid away like camouflage. The forest seemed to ripple, like heat distortion on pavement. Then it darted. A blur crossed into the creek ahead of us, splashing water high. We froze, Jasper growling for the first time. What I saw in that creek still knots my stomach. At first, it was translucent, like a shape made of water itself. A long, thin body about 4 or 5 feet, shimmering as though the creek refused to decide if it was there. Then it darkened, edges sharpening, until it became solid. It rose from the water, slow, deliberate, unfolding like some kind of nightmare insect. It stood taller than me, a mantis-shaped figure with arms too long, elbows bending at odd angles. Its chest was narrow, ribs visible under a gray-green surface. The head was triangular, alien in every sense, with 2 golden eyes bulging out like polished marbles. They caught what little light the canopy offered and reflected it back in a way that wasn't natural. It was focused like it wanted us pinned. I tried to move. My legs ignored me. My arms went numb. Mike hissed, "Glenn, I can't." His voice cut off, strangled. Jasper crouched, teeth bared, but even he couldn't move forward. It was as if every muscle we owned had been switched off. The being tilted its head. Its movements weren't jerky like an insect's. They were liquid, slow, almost hypnotic, as if it swam through air. Every step toward us made the paralysis heavier, as though the air thickened around our bodies. My chest clenched. I couldn't breathe deep enough. Nausea surged, dizzying, and I thought I'd black out standing upright. The creature lifted one long arm, clawed fingers unfolding. It didn't touch us. It didn't need to. My vision tunneled. Jasper whimpered, sound strangled like it came from underwater. I thought, this is it. We'll never leave this trail. Then as suddenly as it came, it shifted again. Its body blurred at the edges, fading to translucent, the golden eyes burning like twin lanterns in fog. One more step and it was less solid. Another step and it was nothing but shimmer. The air released us. My knees buckled and I caught myself on the ground, gasping. Mike collapsed fully, coughing hard, skin pale and clammy. Jasper bolted 3 yards and retched in the dirt. And just like that, the forest breathed again. The charge drained from the air. Birds picked up tentative notes as if testing the silence. The smell of sulfur thinned until only the wet, green scent of ferns and creek remained. We stumbled back down the trail without a word. Mike's hands shook so hard he dropped the flashlight twice even though it was broad daylight. Jasper refused to leave my side, ears pinned, tail glued to his belly. Every snap of a twig made us jolt. When we reached the parking lot, Mike finally spoke. We don't tell anyone this. His eyes darted like he already saw disbelief waiting for him. I didn't argue. Later, when I lay in bed, I replayed the paralysis. It wasn't just fear, it was forced. Whatever that thing was, it reached inside us and flicked the switch that makes you able. And it let us go. That thought chills me more than anything. It chose to. Weeks after, I went back to Spruce Flats just once during daylight. Families with kids clambered along the rocks, laughing, taking photos by the falls. The air felt normal. No sulfur, no charge. I almost convinced myself it had been a hallucination. Almost. Until Jasper started whining again, hackles stiff, staring at the same stretch of creek where the thing had risen. I turned us around. I haven't gone back since. People talk about Bigfoot, mountain lions, even ghosts in the Smokies. But no one ever warns you about mantis-shaped beings that can paralyze your body and make you feel like your soul has been pinned under a microscope. I don't expect them to believe me if I do tell it. But I know what I saw. The woods hold more than bears and shadows. Some things move like water, smell like sulfur, and look at you with eyes too golden to belong here. And once you've seen them, the forest is never just trees again. Midnight in the Smokies carries its own weight. The trees don't whisper, they stand like witnesses. In 2011, I was a seasonal ranger driving home from a late shift on Deep Creek Road, winding the narrow curves with the window cracked to lead in the cold. The dashboard clock read 12:04. I remember it because I glanced down at the exact second my headlights caught movement near the old picnic area. At first I thought bear. An upright shadow stood by a rotting table, broad and tall, the kind of size that makes instinct tighten your grip on the wheel. But as the beams carved through the dark, I realized this wasn't a bear balancing on hind legs. The hair was long, not thick like fur, but flowing black, hanging in tangles that nearly brushed the tabletop. Its arms were too thin, too elongated. And the hands, God, the hands were pale and bony, fingers stretched far too long, each joint sharp as if it had been drawn by a nervous artist. The face, though, was the worst. It wasn't an animal's face. Beneath that curtain of black hair, the features were nearly human. Heavy brow, hollow cheeks, mouth slack as though caught between words. The eyes didn't shine like deer's eyes, reflecting light. They swallowed it. My truck rolled a little closer before I realized my foot wasn't on the gas. My chest tightened, every sense telling me I had stumbled into something I shouldn't see. And then it hit. The smell. It wasn't carried on a breeze, it invaded. A stench of rotting meat soured with ammonia, like an outhouse mixed with carrion. The odor filled the cab in seconds, so strong I gagged, tears blurring my sight. In that moment, the creature turned its head. Just a small shift, deliberate, like acknowledging me. No panic, no aggression, only recognition. I stared into that human not human face for 10 seconds, maybe less, but it stretched, slow and heavy, until I wished for nothing more than to be blind. Then the shape melted backward into the dark, hair brushing branches as if the woods accepted it. The smell lingered, thick as smoke, even after it was gone. I rolled my windows up, though it didn't help. My breath came shallow, the way you breathe when the air itself feels poisonous. I didn't stop driving until the ranger station lights glowed behind me. I sat in the parking lot, head pressed to the steering wheel, the stench still in my clothes. The next day, I told a coworker in a roundabout way, asked if he'd ever seen anything strange near Deep Creek. He didn't laugh. He looked at me long, then said he'd heard stories. Bigger ones, hairier, more ape than man, aggressive, even when people stumbled too close. He described the same smell, rotting meat and urine strong enough to burn your throat. He said some rangers avoided that stretch at night entirely. That should have comforted me, but it didn't, because what I saw wasn't just some wild ape hidden in the hills. It was something that blurred the line, a shape that could stand in a picnic ground built by people and look like it had a right to be there. And that face, Too human for me to call it beast, too wrong for me to call it kin, burned itself into my memory. For weeks, the smell haunted me. I catch it faint in my truck, though I scrub the seats. Sometimes it seemed to cling to my jacket, even fresh from the wash. Once in my cabin, the odor rose so strong I tore apart the place looking for a dead animal under the floorboards. Nothing. I stopped driving Deep Creek at night. When duty forced me down it, I rolled fast, eyes on the road, refusing to glance at that old picnic ground. I tell myself I was being smart, but truthfully, I was afraid that if I looked, I'd see it again, waiting, watching. Some nights, just before sleep, I'd remember those hands. Not claws, not paws, fingers too long, meant to grasp, to open, to test. And I'd wonder how close it might have come to the truck when the smell grew unbearable. How easily those fingers could have pressed against the glass. Rangers aren't supposed to talk about these things. We're meant to give the public bears, deer, maybe the occasional cougar. But I know what I saw on that beam of headlights. And I know the Smokies hold more than trails and waterfalls. They hold watchers, tall and silent, carrying with them the stink of death and the uncanny echo of our own faces. I used to think the forest was indifferent. Now I think it remembers. And sometimes, when you're unlucky enough, it lets you see what it's been keeping hidden. I wasn't there the day Sam disappeared, but I've walked the Mother Mountain Loop enough times to picture it. A trail that twists like a question, climbing through alpine meadows before dropping in a forest so dense you feel swallowed whole. In October 2020, when the air was already sharpening toward winter, Sam set out alone with his pack and his grin. He was 33, a professor, fit and experienced, someone who had faced harder climbs than Rainier. He told friends he'd be back the next day. He never came back at all. The first report came late. He hadn't checked in, hadn't called. At first, it was easy to imagine delays, a broken phone, a choice to stay another night, maybe the joy of being away from a world that always asked too much. But on the mountain, time isn't generous. A hiker overdue by hours could be a hiker lost by days. Rangers were dispatched before dawn. The search built quickly. Helicopters roared over ridgelines, blades chopping at clouds that refused to lift. Volunteers combed meadows where frost bent every blade of grass. Dog teams pulled at leashes, noses in the dirt, but no scent line appeared. It was as if Sam had stepped off the trail and into a place the world couldn't follow. I joined one of the ground crews. Boots in wet soil, radios crackling, we swept the forest grid by grid. Rainier is deceptive. She looks beautiful from a distance, a queen crowned in white. Up close, she's ruthless. One wrong step can drop you into creeks that vanish beneath ice bridges. Fog slides in without warning and swallows whole teams. We searched those places anyway, shouting his name in a mist that smothered the sound. Days stacked, 9 of them. The mountain was covered like never before. Alpine ridges, boulder fields, riverbanks, the twisted gullies where water disappears underground. Searchers rappelled down cliffs where moss grew slick as soap. They scoured every turn of the loop. Nothing. No scraps of clothing. No boot prints. No broken branches that might have told of a struggle. Not a single piece of evidence that Sam had ever set foot there. I remember one evening, after hours in cold drizzle, we gathered back at base. A ranger unrolled the map and marked the sections we'd cleared. The paper filled with lines, more and more of the mountain painted with our efforts. And still the center of it remained blank, a silence on paper that matched the silence in our hearts. Helicopters circled until weather drove them down. The searchers' voices grew hoarse from calling into emptiness. Each night we returned damp, scraped, exhausted. And each night we said the same thing. How could someone vanish so completely in a place so traveled? Rainier is dangerous, yes, but it is also mapped, measured, known. People die there, but they leave traces, a pack, a boot, a body in the thaw. Sam left nothing. On the 9th day, the official search ended. Crews were pulled. Families begged for more time, but storms were coming, snow that would bury everything until spring. The mountain, cold and patient, was already closing her grip. Sam's friends and family didn't stop. They posted flyers, organized their own smaller searches, lit candles in Seattle apartments while watching the summit on clear nights as if it might answer back. His students spoke of his brilliance, his laughter, the way he made anthropology more than textbooks. His absence hurt in ways that data couldn't measure. And still, no trace. Some said he must have fallen into one of Rainier's many hidden traps, where water runs beneath ice, carving caverns that collapse without a sound. Others whispered about disorientation, about how fog can spin you in circles until you step off a ledge. But even then, there should have been something. The mountain takes, but she doesn't erase. Not like this. I walked that trail since slower, quieter. The meadows bloom bright in summer, marmots whistling from rocks, butterflies drifting like paper scraps. But when the wind hushes, I feel it, the hollow where an answer should be. I picture Sam rounding a bend, boots steady, breath strong, and then simply gone, like a candle snuffed in a room no one else entered. The forest knows. The river knows. Rainier knows. We don't. Sam Double became more than a missing hiker. He became a reminder that mountains don't owe us closure. They keep their secrets, and sometimes their secrets are people. To this day, no one has found a thread of him. Not a scrap of gear, not a print in mud, not a body waiting for spring's thaw. Just a name carried on the wind, and a question that deepens each year. How can someone so alive simply vanish? The truth is brutal in its simplicity. Rainier is a vault, and Sam is locked inside, not in bone or blood, but in silence. March 17th, 2012 began like any other day in the Smokies, but it ended with a mystery that still hasn't let go of me. I was one of the rangers called when a white Ford Escape was spotted at the Newfound Gap parking lot. Cars get left there all the time. Hikers miss their return, decide to camp an extra night. Sometimes they even hitchhike out and forget to call it in. But this one was different. On the dashboard, clearly placed where no one could miss it, said a note. For words, written in blocky pen strokes, "Don't try to follow me." At first glance, it sounded like a goodbye. We'd all seen our share of hikers who came into the mountains carrying grief heavier than their packs. Just a week earlier, we'd handled a suicide near Alum Cave. But there was something off here. The car wasn't abandoned in desperation. It was neatly locked, nothing scattered, nothing rushed. We popped the hatch and found Derek's wallet and ID, his credit cards, even some cash. Most of the time, suicides leave behind scraps, torn notes, or nothing at all. Derek had left supplies, a tent, a sleeping bag, a brand new set of maps. His gear was lined up as if ready for a weekend trip. If his intent was to vanish, why prepare like a camper? The search began immediately. 60 people on foot, 3 K9 units, teams rappelling down cliff faces where the trail disappears into sheer drops. Helicopters traced grid after grid, their blades chopping through the mountain silence. Nothing, not a boot print, not a scrap of fabric, just endless ridges and valleys swallowing our voices as we called his name. By day 3, whispers started. Some said Derek was a survivalist, obsessed with man versus wild, that he'd talked about disappearing into the woods and living off the land. I'd seen men like that before, drawn to the fantasy of wilderness testing them, breaking them, or remaking them. But the Smokies are not forgiving. This isn't a place where a man can vanish into a new life. Food is scarce, weather changes without warning, and the forest holds more ways to die than to survive. On the 5th day, a storm swept over the ridges. Cold rain hammered down, turning trails to mud, making the search dangerous. We pressed on, soaked, eyes stinging from the water. Dogs lost whatever faint scent they thought they had. The rain washed it all away. Derek's family set up camp near the ranger station. His mother paced the lot, clutching her phone like it might ring with news. His father stood apart, arms folded, jaw clenched tight, the kind of silence that keeps a man from breaking. They asked us every evening if we'd found anything, and every evening we gave them the same answer. No. The strangest part came on the 7th day. Another hiker, Michael Caccini, disappeared in nearly the same area. Just like Derek, gone without a trace. Weeks later, Michael's remains were found near a drainage, the mountain giving back what it had taken. But Derek? Nothing. 10 years later, still nothing. I keep thinking about that note. Don't try to follow me. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't scrawled in panic. It read like an instruction, calm and deliberate. Did he mean suicide? A private exit into the wilderness? Or did he mean something else? Something we weren't supposed to see? One night, long after the search had ended, I drove past Newfound Gap. Derek's car was gone by then, but I could still picture it sitting there, windows fogged, note on the dash. The lot was empty, fog rolling in waves across the pavement. I pulled over and cut the engine. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the woods. I imagined Derek walking into that fog, pack on his shoulders, maps in his hand. Did he step off the trail deliberately, into a ravine no one would search? Did he climb until the weather claimed him? Or did he find something else in those woods, something none of us would understand, even if we had followed? When people ask me about the strangest disappearance I've ever worked, I tell them Derek's. Because the mountain usually leaves clues, a footprint, a broken branch, a body in the thaw. But Derek Luking left nothing but a note that tells us exactly what we've done ever since. Tried to follow and failed. The Smokies are older than memory. They've seen people come and go for centuries, some leaving stories, some leaving bones. Derek left neither. He left a command, and maybe the truest way to honor it is to stop asking. But I can't. Every time I walk those trails, I look into the trees and wonder if somewhere, somehow, he's still out there. Not lost, not dead, just gone in a way the rest of us can't follow. September 6th, 2025, started like so many mornings in Yosemite. Thin mountain air, a crisp sky painted with the promise of adventure. That morning, 31-year-old Joel Thomason shouldered his yellow and gray backpack at the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir trailhead. He carried a green sleeping bag, a hammock rolled tight, and even a red inflatable kayak strapped to his pack. He looked prepared, deliberate. He told friends he planned to hike the 9-mile trail to Lake Eleanor and be back by September 9th. The trail he chose wasn't wild, not really. It was well-traveled, a path families take, a path where boots pack the dirt into a reliable ribbon. But Joel never returned. When he didn't check in, rangers released his description to the public. Buzz cut, athletic frame, all his distinctive gear. By the time I was called into the search, the story was already spreading across the valley. Not because men disappear in Yosemite. That happens more often than anyone likes to admit, but because Joel had vanished on one of the easiest, most visible routes in the park. We started with the obvious. 16 search and rescue members spread out, joined by Tuolumne County deputies. Dogs sniffed along the trail, noses pressed into soil where thousands of other feet had walked. Helicopters traced the ridgeline, their rotors scattering the silence, while kayaks scanned the water of the reservoir and Lake Eleanor itself. Each search returned the same verdict. Nothing. Not a scrap of fabric, not a boot print, not a dropped wrapper. The trail may as well have swallowed him whole. That first night, I sat with the map spread on the hood of our truck. The trail between Hetch Hetchy and Eleanor curved through meadows and over ridges, places I'd hike myself on lazy Sundays. I traced it with my finger and felt a chill. How could anyone vanish on a route where you pass other hikers every mile? On day 2, we began canvassing visitors. Families, solo backpackers, fishermen. None of them remembered passing a man with a red kayak strapped to his pack. Some shrugged, saying maybe he'd started earlier, maybe later. But the loop was finite, and by now we should have found him. The dogs grew restless. Normally, when you hand them a scent from a piece of clothing, they'll pull you hard towards some lead. Maybe weak, maybe fading, but something. This time, they whined, circled, then sat down as if confused. One handler swore the dogs acted like the scent was everywhere and nowhere at once. By day 4, the quiet dread settled in. When people fall into ravines, into water, they leave behind signs. Broken brush, scraps of gear, something. But Joel left nothing. It was as though the trail had erased him. I walked sections alone, listening to the wind drag through the pines, listening harder for what wasn't there. No clue, no reason, just the echo of my own boots. In one shaded stretch, I stopped and stared at the dirt. Thousands of tracks blurred together, old and new. I tried to imagine Joel's distinct tread weaving among them. It should have been there. It wasn't. On the 6th day, Tuolumne brought in more boats, scouring shorelines. Divers braved the icy reservoir, though everyone knew it was unlikely. Still, the water held no secrets. By the 9th day, the official search wound down. The crews were exhausted, their maps bleeding with red grids, every possible zone checked and rechecked. I watched them roll up the ropes and collapse, tense with the same heavy silence we'd seen before. When hope dies but duty insists you stay busy. Joel's family clung to one question. How could he vanish on a popular trail? Not the backcountry, not an unmarked scramble. A trail parents hike with their kids. And not all of us. People disappear in wilderness, yes, but here, with boats, helicopters, dogs, dozens of searchers. That night, long after the others had left, I drove back to Hetch Hetchy. The reservoir glowed silver in the moonlight, smooth as glass. I parked at the trailhead and sat with the engine off. The quiet pressed in. I imagined Joel stepping onto the dirt 9 days earlier, shoulders squared, gear tight, the lake catching the morning sun behind him. I tried to picture where he might have gone wrong, slipped, strayed, turned. But every possibility ended in the same emptiness. Sometimes mountains keep their dead. Other times they keep their secrets. Joel left no sign of either. The file stays open, technically. Missing, not declared dead. Families cling to that word. Missing, as though it still contains a door back to the world. But I've worked Yosemite too long not to know what it means. Missing is the kind of silence that lingers. Missing is a trail that refuses to answer. Even now, when I hike that path, I catch myself looking sideways into the trees, half expecting to see a flash of red nylon, a hammock strung between trunks, a man stepping out with a sheepish grin. But the woods offer nothing back. Just the creak of branches, the hum of insects, the rhythm of boots. Joel Thomason walked into one of Yosemite's busiest trails and disappeared as if the earth itself swallowed him. And when I stand at the trailhead now, I can't help but think of his noteless absence, how the mountain gave us no explanation, no mercy, no trace. In Yosemite, Some vanishings feel like accidents. Others feel like erasures. Joel's was the latter. And that, more than anything, keeps me awake at night.